Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and for the past couple of weeks I've been riding this, the BMW R1300GS. Safe to say I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's really impressed me. There's loads of great enhancements versus the previous generation. You've got more power, less weight, more tech. But ultimately the question I've got to answer is whether this is the bike that you should be spending your money on if you're looking to buy a large capacity adventure bike in 2024. So in this video we're going to take it out for a spin and go through each of the major review categories, and I'll tell you everything that I liked about it and everything that I disliked to find out.
So look, let's start with this engine then. The new Boxer twin that's had a fairly major update since the previous gen 1250. So there's more power, more torque and less weight, and so it's been a pretty significant reworking of this old favourite. It definitely shows out on the road, and combined with the weight loss elsewhere on the bike, this 1300GS feels really quite rapid. There's absolutely bags of torque in the mid-range, and so it should be quick enough for anyone, at least in terms of what's expected from an adventure bike anyway. Thing is though, that all said, while there has been a big bump in performance, in terms of the sound and feel of the bike, it really is very much the same as the previous gen Boxer. You know, the sound of this bike has always been a bit of a divisive point, with this smooth droning note that seems to sound a bit dull to some people, but yet at the same time also seems to be able to bring a joyful tear to the eye of a Boxer enthusiast. It sounds like a Boxer twin.
In my opinion, the competition like the Tiger 1200, the KTM 1290 Super Adventure, the Ducati Multistrada V4 and Harley's Pan America all offer a bit more acoustic aggression, which is more to my preference. But I guess the flip side of these even firing intervals that make this plain sound is that you've got a really nice smooth engine that's going to be exceptionally comfortable over distance, and so from a practical perspective rather than the emotive, you could easily argue it's a good thing. On top of that, the shift cam tech in this engine, which varies the valve timing and lift, means that despite the extra oomph for this new model, it's still the most efficient of the pack, at least according to the official consumption figures, at just 4.8 litres of fuel consumed per 100 kilometers travelled. So despite losing a litre of fuel capacity versus the 1250 it replaces, you're still theoretically getting about 395 kilometers or 245 miles, which I think ought to be ample.
So look, is this the best engine on the large capacity adventure bike market? Well, I think it depends on what you want it for. It probably isn't going to make your hair stand on end in the same way a Multistrada V4 can when you've got it wide open on the throttle. But if smoothness and efficiency are higher up your shopping list, as well as still being able to massively get a shift on, then it really is pretty flipping hard to beat. It's a similar story on the handling front too. There's lots of enhancements with a brand new frame design that's said to be more rigid, as well as helping with that reduced total weight figure. There's a reworking of the signature telelever front end. There's the option now of these upgraded sports brakes, and you can swap out the wheels too for these new forged enduro rims that are both light and strong. So yes, lots of enhancements, and out on the road it does feel much lighter, less cumbersome than the previous generation, and there is plenty of power and feel from this new braking setup. But I think ultimately, like the engine, you've got a chassis design that's different to the competition, and so it has a different feel. Predominantly it's going to be this front suspension with the telelever, which is built to eliminate dive as well as separate turning and suspension forces, and that's as opposed to a regular telescopic fork like the ones you'll find on the bikes I just mentioned.
The result, along with the way that the engine holds its weight super low, is a bike that feels extremely planted, and it's light on the steering as well. Thing is though, as with everything, there is a little bit of a trade-off, and with the telelever it just doesn't feed back in the same way that a more typical chassis does, and you don't get the same amount of sporty feel from the front. You see, you turn the bars and the front wheel turns without any fuss at all, but having ridden it back to back with the Tiger 1200 the other day, for example, it just doesn't feel so typical and sporty, and you can't feel so precisely what's going on with the front wheel. So again, is it the one that will ignite your motorcycling soul as you barrel in and out of corners? Probably not. But is it the one that feels easy to use and reassuring? Well, for me, yes indeed it is. And so, you see, there is a little bit of a theme developing here.
I'd almost certainly be looking to pick this bike if I was biasing more towards the touring side of adventure riding. You know, despite the fact that it's come down a bit in terms of its size and stature, with this much slimmer look to it, you know, it's still a very, very comfortable bike that doesn't seem to have sacrificed much, certainly in terms of wind protection anyway. You've got this electronically adjustable windscreen now, which really is a nice little convenience. And combined with the extra deflectors on the side there, plus the handguards with the neatly integrated indicators, this is one of the quietest cockpits I've ridden for some time. I still feel like there's plenty of space in the ergonomics too. You've got that typically big and wide GS bar position, plenty of room down to the foot pegs as well, and also you've got a few different options in terms of the seat height too, so I think it's going to feel spacious enough for most riders. And the only slight drawback for me versus the 1250 GS anyway is that it seems like they've removed a bit of squishiness from the saddle. So if you don't like firm saddles, it might feel like a bit of a downgrade. But look, otherwise, the GS has always been exceptionally comfortable. And for me, this new bike is very strong on this front as well.
Also, on the tech front, I think it's fair to say that it's now absolutely unparalleled. There are all the rider aids and modes that you could ever need, and it's all neatly presented through the TFT display, which is thoughtfully laid out and easy to use, as is typical of BMW's bikes in my experience. You've also got the phone connectivity and all that good stuff, but one of the big updates for this new model is the fact that you now get radars both front and rear, and this opens up adaptive cruise control, collision warnings, and blind spot warnings. Then on top of that, there's the option of their dynamic semi-active suspension, which adapts to the current riding conditions and riding style to give you the optimal damping and therefore ride quality. And this, I think, is a first for any bike, but not only can it vary the damping, but also the spring rate of both the shocks at either end of the bike, so there should be a wider spectrum of adjustability. Then there's the adaptive ride height at either end too, which automatically drops the bike down as you come to a standstill so that you can more easily get your feet down. And for me, it's the best system I've tried on the market. Now, the adaptive ride height also helps to jack the bike up when you put the center stand down so that it's easier to lift up. And then you've got a phone stash with a charging point, keyless ignition, the option of the fancy connected luggage, their emergency SOS button, and the list goes on. Now granted, a lot of this stuff is accessory fit, and so the price does get pretty serious. This particular press bike that I'm riding is well over 20 grand with all these bells and whistles installed. But regardless of the price, I think it's fair to say that as it stands at the moment, this is the most technologically advanced bike, not just on the adventure bike market, but potentially the entire motorcycle market.
Looks-wise, well, it is a subjective thing, and so it's hard to pick a winner in the adventure market. But what I will say is that this bike certainly caused a bit of a storm when it was first announced. You see, it's a big change versus the 1250, and it looks a lot sleeker, slimmer, cleaner perhaps on the plus side, but I think on the minus side, perhaps a little bit less rugged and a bit less intimidating. Thing is though, the more I've been around it in the flesh, the more I have grown to like the looks. But I'd love to know from you guys down in the comments below which bike you think is the best looking in the large capacity adventure segment. Let's assume that no one's going to pick the Pan America, but are any of the, Tiger 1200, the KTM 1290, the Multistrada V4 better than this? Now on price, this This one starts at £15,990, and that puts it somewhere in the middle of the pack, I think. About £1,000 more than the base Tiger 1200, but also about £1,000 less than the lower spec of Multistrada V4. Naturally, as you start to add all the goodies and accessories, it becomes pretty expensive. I think this one that I'm riding now is well over 20 grand. But again, I think it's a similar story versus those other two bikes that I've used as examples. The Tiger 1200, if you really do spec it out, still comes up a little bit cheaper, whereas the Ducati is always going to be a bit more. So look, it's not the most affordable, but it isn't the worst either.
But the question still remains, is this the best large capacity adventure bike on the market in 2024? Well, for me, it's just an exceptional all-rounder, and certainly if you're looking to do distance and comfort, then I think it might well be the best of the bunch. Other bikes like the Tiger 1200, the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S, or the Ducati Multistrada V4 all feel a bit more exciting to me in terms of the way their engine delivers its power, the way they sound, the way they handle. And so I think if I was riding quicker, doing that sort of more sporty side of large capacity adventure riding, then I'd maybe choose one of the others. But fact is, if I was faced with a very long journey in front of me or a few days off touring, I find it very, very difficult not to choose this.
As always, I'd love to know which bike you'd pick, so do let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to see the more detailed comparison with the Tiger 1200 as well as the previous gen 1250GS, then I've made a playlist which I'll put on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Hit subscribe as well if you've not already to see more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.